Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Pointless Exercise podcast. We're going to talk baseball, and we're not going to talk about the entire league like Dave and I often do. Instead, we are going to focus on the super exciting, red-hot Chicago Cubs. And so, with me, the first-time guest on the podcast is Mike Praznowski. Mike, how are you?
Doing well, Andy. It's an honor to be here. How are you doing?
Good. So now, in the long, illustrious history of this podcast, you are now the fourth Mike.
Yes.
It makes it easy. I
can add it to the collection.
Yeah, I can remember people's names if I just keep it very narrow.
Might get a little confusing because I'm the second Mike P, though, so, well, I'm not as well versed into movies as Pusateri is, but...
Yeah, it's hard to get confused with Mike and in his voice. No one sounds like Mike Pusateri.
That's true. He's got that classic Italian Chicago accent.
Yeah. So glad to have you. And we can talk about the Cubs, who, just for the purposes of our podcast, have decided to score all their runs for the month in one game. So it's very exciting there. As we were recording this, they were beating the Pirates 10-1. And by the time we finish, you guys will be like, well, they lost 12-10. But we'll see what happens. I didn't even know this is the third game of a four-game series. I didn't even know until tonight.
I'm literally on the same page with you there.
I didn't know that Ryan Dempster is doing the games. I was like, oh, God, is that Dempster? Yeah.
Is he as bad as I think he is? Because, again, as we talked about before, I don't have cable. I don't get Marquee. I only get to watch on TV every now and then. It's mostly Pat and Ron for me.
Yeah, I'm sure we can get you a password. I'm sure. Well, it's funny, right? I loathe him. It's well known. I don't hide my loathing for Ryan Dempster for many reasons. He's not a terrible analyst, but he has an awful voice. Awful.
Yes, really does.
It sounds like it's an NPR host doing for a guy who is Mr. Yuckity Yuck Yuck. He's kind of soft spoken. Maybe it's because he's a Canadian, and it doesn't work. He's better like this, where when Jim DeShays isn't there, because when Jim is, you just get reminded that Jim is so much better. Why the fuck do we need Ryan Dempster in the booth? So. But yeah, I'm sure DeShays looked at the Pittsburgh series and went, I'm not doing that. Send Canuck Boy. He can go up there. He can go to that game. So the Cubs are, they're doing all the right things. So they called up Nelson Velasquez from Iowa and immediately put him in the lineup so we could get. Oh no, that's right. They didn't do that. Why would you want to play him? He did get to pinch hit tonight though. I don't know if they left him in the game. I don't know if it's safe enough. Only a 9-run lead. I don't know if it's safe to keep Nelson in the game, but they're.
Have they given Jason Heyward his ample amount of playing time yet tonight?
He's batting right now. I can't. It would be in. What was the old MLB disclaimer? It'd be a I can't think of which they used. Transmission. We can't do that.
Yeah.
So last night. I was all excited when he went 0 for 1. He didn't get a hit his first at bat. His batting average dropped to 190. And I thought, well, of course he'll make it out next time. And when he does, then I will be able to, because I already looked it up. They talk about a guy not hitting his weight. If he got under 190, there would only be, here's a nice trivia question for you. There would only be 3 Cubs on the team whose weight he was hitting. That does include one tiny little guy on the injured list. There's a clue.
Oh, that's
so who do you think the 3
okay.
Cubs, and one of them I think is a trick question, who do you think the 3 Cubs that Jason Heyward was hitting better than their weight?
Man. So I take it we're including some skinny pitcher who's probably there right now that is just getting a cup of coffee.
All 3, you will know all 3 of these guys. There's none of them are obscure.
Okay. I mean...
Well, one of them I gave you a hint. One of them's a tiny little guy who's on the injured list.
Nick Madrigal.
145 pounds.
Wow.
I mean,
jeez. I don't know what you would do at 145
Then there's another guy that
pounds.
they list at 145 pounds, but it's clear that nobody's weighed him for like the last 5 years. And I don't know what's going on. I don't know if the Cubs don't own a scale. They don't weigh these guys. Oh, that's take them down to the Y. We'll throw them on the scale. That's free.
I'm thinking, is that the other guess I had in mind was Nico Horner.
Nope.
Because he's kind
Nico,
of slender.
I believe they list Nico at 190 pounds, which is, I think, BS, but still, that's fine.
Right. Yeah. It feels weird. Like, once you break into the big leagues, like, they don't really change it ever for you, which...
Much to Bartolo Colon's appreciation. He got to stay 185 his entire career, even though he was 300
Miguel Montero.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. I gave you an unfair question. So, the guy who is listed at 145, which clearly is not 145 pounds, is Christopher Morel. And I know it's because he was a tiny little guy when they signed him, and they've just never updated it. And then Kyle Hendricks.
Would make sense.
180 pounds.
Kyle Hendricks, of course.
So there was a skinny little pitcher, but I didn't want you to think it was some like 13th guy on the staff.
Yeah, my mind was on like Caleb Killian or someone like that, but yeah, that makes sense for Hendricks because I mean, obviously he's not that weight anymore, but like he has the presence of someone who only weighs about 140 pounds. Mm-hmm. As much as I love Kyle Hendricks, but especially this year.
Maybe high school wrestlers should try this. If you're trying to make weight, if you just shrug your shoulders when you weigh yourself, maybe you weigh less. Maybe you just disperse it.
Just bring all the weight up to the top.
Then lean back over the scale. Maybe it won't register.
Just got to go the full Craig Kimbrell pre-pitch. Yeah.
So you brought up Heyward. I was reading tweets between Matt Clapp and Bert over at Bleacher Nation today. I believe it was those two, but they were saying, I know Clapp was talking about how they're, the way they're handling, the way they keep forcing Heyward into the lineup is just making fans hate him.
Yeah.
And I don't hate him any more than I ever did. Because I know he's not actually he doesn't write his name in the lineup card. And he's not any good, and I gave up a long time ago that he was ever going to be good. So I save all the hate for Jed and David Ross. I feel like my hate is properly dispersed.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's, you've talked about it a bunch. It's a sunk cost at this point. Like, I heard, did you happen to hear Jed Hoyer on with Cap earlier today?
I just saw some of the highlights. Did you see the picture of Cap that Mark Silverman tweeted out where he looks just like NoHo Hank from he's like, look, I found a celebrity. He's like, oh, that's NoHo Hank from Barry. It's like, Dave, I know you've gone paleo. You might want to mix in a candy bar once in a while.
Yeah, and not good for the shower videos either if he still does those.
Or the cryo tank. Maybe the cryo tank is wrinkling him. I don't know. Okay, so what did Jed tell Cap and Hood?
Basically giving him the same runaround that, like, we've had a lot of guys injured. We've had, it's created an opportunity for him to play since Seiya Suzuki's been out, and that, he's still a guy that mentors all the young guys, and he's a valuable piece to have around. And it's just like, at some point, doesn't that message kind of ring a little bit hollow if you plan to be on this team for a long time, knowing that this guy's not going to be around that long?
Yeah, I mean, you know what a player who can't play that is a mentor. They have a name for those.
Coaches. Yeah. And
I would be more than happy if you could pay him $22.5 million to coach. I'm fine. I'm all for the Ricketts having to pay every penny of that contract. I have no problem with that. I do not begrudge Jason his money. I would say he earned it, but he didn't really earn it. But he deserves it because they offered it to him and he took it. That's fine. But I can't watch it anymore. I mean, I was done with it a long time ago, and it's so bad. Yeah, so I think one thing, if this was a normal organization, you'd be like, all right, this sucks, But when Seiya comes back, that clearly is the end of the road for Jay because you got Happen left. It's like Ross has forgotten that Morel can play other positions. He plays him in center all the time, even though they have this gaping hole at second base right now. It's like maybe just put him there. I think the idea then will be, Seiya go back to right field, and then they'll just. But I don't have any. I mean, my guess is all that'll happen is they'll send Velasquez back to Iowa, and Heyward to go to the bench where he's completely useless. I mean, he's never been a good pinch hitter. He's not going to because he can't hit. He's not really a defensive replacement anymore. I guess he's better than some of the chuckleheads they have out there, but that doesn't make him good anymore.
He's definitely taken like a step back in the one department he's been good at over the past like year or so, I'd say. Yeah. And what value do you really have at that point?
So I know it was in the Athletic. I think it was Sahadev. Oh, I know what it was. It was the Athletic Baseball Podcast. I don't know if you knew this, but back when they started that podcast, they had 3 guys who wrote about the Cubs for the Athletic, and they decided they needed 3 guys for a podcast, and they picked 2 of us. And then Brett, which I never quite understood. That was fine. Not bitter about that at all. But anyway, so on that podcast, which I've never listened to, they had like a clip that they embedded into a tweet. And it was Sahadev. This was I think right before the season started, saying, this puts Jed in a really tough position. The right thing to do, he's got to go to Tom Ricketts and say, Tom, you're going to have to eat $45 million worth of salary over the next 2 years because Jason can't play, and we really shouldn't waste a roster spot on him. Then you have to go to David Ross and say, your old buddy from Atlanta, the guy who gave you let you use the suite on the road through the entire World Series year, we're getting rid of him for nothing. And I even looked at that clip and went, that's the fucking job.
Exactly.
That's what Jed is supposed to do. We're not here to coddle, Rossi so he gets to keep his friends. I thought the whole idea with David Ross was, we're going to get him because Joe's gone too soft on the players. Ross is going to come in, he's going to kick ass, and he's not going to put up with any of this shit. If you're not pulling your weight, you're not playing hard, you're not doing whatever, he's going to mix things up. Unless you're one of the other catchers and you criticize the team for not playing hard, then you're going to get called out in the media for that, and then they're going to be like, we're probably going to have to trade him now because he's not going to want to stay. And or you're one of his buddies who needs to be benched and then eventually released. Other than that, Ross is really going to get after it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think a lot of fans got like that impression of Ross because I remember there was a game last year where Javier Baez didn't tag up or something, was it? He got doubled off of first base after running too far away on a fly ball.
Yeah.
And Ross benched him then, and we were like, okay, like Ross isn't actually going to put up with this shit. And then we see that, like, obviously Jason Heyward's like poor play doesn't have to do with him like losing focus or not trying hard, but just at a certain time, you got to realize the spot that your team is in and the spot that your organization is in, and realize that he's not going to be part of it going forward. You might as well put in guys who you could see something here with.
Right. Yeah, it's never been an effort thing with Heyward. And that's why this whole idea that this is making Cub fans hate him. It's like, I'm never going to hate him. I thought it was a bad signing when they signed him. I've talked about this a million times on this podcast, but it's the thing Theo wasn't supposed to do. Right, Theo was supposed
the thing that Jim Hendry would do.
Right, the Hendry thing about we'll find a good player, we'll pay him like a great player, and he'll become a great player. It's like that doesn't work that way. Your salary does not. You pay a guy more, it doesn't make him better. It just means you paid him more. Mm-hmm. And then he got here and he just wasn't. He's never really been very good. They changed his swing the very first spring. John Malley couldn't wait to get his hands on him, and he's never been right. But the Braves would tell you that they traded him with a year to go in free agency because they didn't want to keep him. They just didn't think he was as good a player. He was going to command a much bigger salary than he was worth. So they traded him instead. But just because a guy's bad doesn't mean that you hate him. I do think he showed up at the perfect season, given that
Mm-hmm.
everything else was going right. So even though people are like, "What the fuck is wrong with Heyward?" It wasn't. The Cubs were winning at an incredible clip, and it was easy to just like go, "Well, he'll figure it out eventually." You didn't have to. You didn't worry about it. And then the mythical locker room speech, weight room speech, which is what he'll be remembered for forever, whether it had anything to do with it or not. And then it's just been a lot of
It's been
mediocre production.
a whole lot of lip service too of just how great of a teammate he is, and that's really worth keeping around. Like Jed said earlier today, is how he's being a mentor. Um, you know,
But who's he mentoring? They don't have. I mean, is he mentoring Rafael Ortega? Are they basically the same age? Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom. I mean, this is the oldest bunch of
I was gonna say the clip they always show of Rafael Ortega sometimes at games where he made his big league debut with the Braves wasn't like Jason Heyward on that same team too. Maybe he mentored him so that they'd show up as teammates all the way 10 years later.
Yeah, the outfield was
bad Cub team.
Jason Heyward, Rafael Ortega, and Hank Aaron. That was the outfield for the Braves that day. That's how far back you go. Then there's. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It was just more things that I took in from the afternoon, or not afternoon, the midday show on ESPN that just wanted to get a little good enough background in, because I have been tied up with a lot of things lately that have kind of taken me away from having my full focus on the team.
Oh, yeah, you've been missing a lot, let me tell you.
Yeah, not exactly. Apparently, Seiya Suzuki is not exactly close. According to what Cap said earlier today, he's having trouble gripping his bat.
Is that
so
a
that's
problem?
always a great sign.
Is that a problem? Do you need to hold the bat tightly when you swing? Maybe not. God. Isn't it? It's just the most Cub thing ever. He jams his finger sliding back into a bag, and then they're like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. We're not even going to X-ray it. It's going to be fine." And then a few days later, maybe we might X-ray it. But he doesn't need to go on the injured list. And they play 5 games without him, and then just precautionary. He's only going to miss the minimum amount of games. Let's put him on injured list. And
let me see your hand real quick. It looks really similar to Coy Hill's hand.
It's like, well, that's what they should do, right? They should take him into the doctor, have him put the bat in his hands, and then just sew like that finger around the bat. That'd be fine. There, can you grip it now, Seiya? He's like, what the? Maybe some acupuncture. I don't know. Try something. It's funny. It's very easy to forget he's on the team. Like, what are they going to do about right field? Oh, they have a right fielder. That's right. They actually have a right fielder. He just can't play right now because his finger is going in the wrong direction. That's not good. It's like when you get these breathless updates from Cub fans about, guys are coming back. David Bodie's almost ready. I can't wait for that. Marcus Stroman he got to the towel drill. And Drew Smiley's throwing underhand.
Yep.
And Wade Miley is wearing a life jacket in the whirlpool. Everything's going great. They'll all be back soon.
Yeah, we're really in a hurry to get all these guys that were not good back.
Like the Stroman thing, I mean, this is already heading down one of those 5 years from now. You're like, did Marcus Stroman pitch for the Cubs? He did? I forgot that. When? Oh yeah, they were awful. Was he hurt the whole time? Yeah. And then he signed with the Giants and he won 28 games? That's right. That's what happened.
Yep. Yeah, talking about signing with the Giants in spring training.
Yes, he's already
right when he signed with the Cubs.
Like, my deal with these assholes is only 2 years.
It'll probably be shorter than that.
They offered me a contract right before the lockout, and I'm like, I'm taking it. I don't care who offers it to me. I'm taking it. And then I got here and went, ooh, this place is different here. Yeah, and then the Wade Miley thing was, here's the problem. Like, they're going to learn the wrong lesson about the Wade Miley thing, because that was exactly the kind of thing they should do. The Reds put him on waivers because they didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay his $1 million. What do you call it? His buyout. They owed him $10 million. Sir didn't want to pay him that. Put him on waivers, hoping some team would claim him, which would get him out of the $1 million. The Cubs claim him, and it's like, all right, this is perfect. All it cost you was money, and you're going to get to the trade deadline, and you're going to flip him for a prospect.
Yeah. Ideal world, he becomes like Scott Feldman 2.0.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Paul Mahallam, or Jason Hamill, who then turned into Jason Hamill.
Right.
And then it's not working out because he can't pitch. Every time he throws, his shoulder falls off, and that's an issue. And I get to see the Cubs, we're not doing that again. No, that's exactly the kind of thing you're supposed to do. Because even if it doesn't work out, all it cost you was $10 million. And I hate to break it to you guys, for a Major League Baseball team, it's nothing. You don't get to act like it's a tremendous amount of money when you're charging people, $75 to sit in the bleachers to watch the Cubs and the Pirates play grab ass. You don't get to do that. But I just fear that they'll be like, okay, we'll try that. That didn't work. Let's not try that anymore. I don't know. Even if he gets Smiley back, I don't know what you get for him. But it's shaping up to be a very unproductive trade deadline for them. Going into the season, it's like, okay, look at this. We got a fair amount of inventory. My biggest fear is that David Robertson is going to get hurt or just be bad again far enough in advance of the deadline that they can't move him. And the only guy they're going to trade is the guy they shouldn't trade, is Willson.
Right.
I mean, I guess we talk about that. Now, I keep making the case because I'm sure Jed subscribes to the newsletter under a pseudonym. I don't know which one he is, but I'm sure he reads it every day.
I think it's just like the Twitter handle that like just has the one tweet that says spanking it.
It's
Jed Hoyer _
spanking it at Gmail. I think there is a guy that has that, so it's probably Jed. I think they've already made their bed with Willson. Like, if you're Willson, if they came to you tonight, with a contract extension, are you going to sign that?
No,
you're going to be like, no, I'm basically made it to free agency now. Thank you very much. I'm going to I'm going to let people bid for me. So no, I don't want your money. But
this is going to be like the best time for Willson to hit free agency too, because like with the DH coming in the National League, like he's not the greatest at framing pitches, but does pretty much everything else behind the plate well. And like, if you need him to be a DH for a team going forward, there's now 15 more options for that. And if there's robo-umps too, that might not matter as much when it comes to the framing. So, like Contreras would not be wise to accept an offer from the Cubs when he could be like one of the top hitters on the market this upcoming winter.
And I mean, he looks around and he looks at the shit that's surrounding him now in the club. I mean, he walked into the clubhouse and walked into the greatest Cub team in 100 years and was like, look at this. Everywhere I look, there's a great player. And 6 years later, he looks around and he's like, everywhere I look, everybody else sucks. Why would I want to stay? Amazing how it changed in 6 short years.
It really is amazing, because I remember like it was yesterday. I was there with my girlfriend at the time for when he hit that first pitch of his Major League career for a home run against the Pirates. I hope you don't mind if I dive into a little nostalgia with this, but like one thing that was kind of personal to me with that was we were sitting like right by where the Cubs bullpen was at the time. Sky Point, the bullpen's on the field. And after the home run, he didn't stay in the game, but he came back over to the Cubs bullpen to catch. And like the section, to each side of me basically kind of realized it and like all gave him a standing ovation. And like that was one of the coolest moments I've like from that season that I'll remember.
That's cool. Very cool. Now they'd have to, halt the game and send him out and somebody open the Sloan door and let him through. It's just not the same.
They'll send him down a pipe that Sloan is probably built in. Like in Futurama.
Yeah, or like a Shawshank. All right, now, Willson, it's the sewer pipe. But as long as nobody flushes between now and then, it's only going to be ankle deep. It'll be fine. Go get them. Yeah, but the Cubs they've already made their bed. They've opened another hole. Supposedly they're rebuilding, but they're still in the excavation phase apparently because now they won't have a catcher. I mean, we're all supposed to get all gooey about Yan Gomes, but when I look at Yan Gomes, I see a guy who does it has a rep as being a very good defensive catcher, and it's just kind of been meh this year. Early in the year, he couldn't catch the ball. Balls were just bouncing off of him. Like,
I was going to say, early
Jan,
in the year...
Have you broken the mid-in yet? Did maybe try that?
Early in the year, he was the guy they were using at DH a lot of games, which, like, what purpose does that serve? Because he's not a good hitter at all.
Can you tell David Ross is a former catcher? Nobody loves to DH catchers better than him. We had Victor Caratini Victor was slugging like 214. They're sending him out as the DH every day. It's like, what are you doing? That reminds me. You were talking about Ross benching Hobby. The first guy that he benched. Remember when he benched Schwarber? There was a ball into the corner, and he didn't think Schwarber busted it after the ball fast enough. And if I'm Schwarber, I'm like, look, Dave. Nobody botches more balls in left field than me. I know the ones I need to run after, the ones I can jog after. It's fine. I knew he wasn't getting to third base. It was fine.
Right.
But they don't have a prospect. I mean, I guess they have. There's some guy now at Class A who is now 30th on their prospect list, and he's a catcher, and he's only like 6 years away from the big leagues. It's like, all right, so then you're going to have to go find a catcher, and you're not going to want to pay for one. So now we're going to be back to the days of having, Damian Miller as our catcher again. It's just, I guess the biggest thing is we can't really trust them. It's very apparent that they, the idea that, okay, you guys want to win, so we know that you're going to figure out where you need to spend the money. It's like, do we really know how bad they want to win? Because it sure as hell doesn't look like it right now. Oh, of course, there's P.J. Higgins, though. I'm sure that's a guy who want to give 120 starts behind the plate, too. I'm sure that'll work out great.
Yeah, I'm sure the guy who made his major league debut at like 27, I mean, fits right in with the rest of the team.
Yeah, they all do.
Schwindel and, yeah.
I mean, it's like the Cubs only, they scouted like the draft class of 2013, and those are the only names they have in their book. And they flip through like, ooh, Frank Schwindel is available. Patrick Wisdom. It's like, oh, can we get somebody a little? You're supposed to be building for the future,
right? Is Cole Stewart still in the organization? I remember that being a name
they had
right after
all
Chris
the Coles.
Bryant.
They had Cole Stewart. They still have Cole Franklin. If you were KOHL, the Cubs were all over you.
You know what? They turned that into a sponsorship with Coles. Then.
Oh, I'm sure that was part
all
of
over the money. Yeah,
I'm sure that's part of it. They need a shoulder patch for next year, and that are, I guess, yeah. And we got all the Coles. We need one more. We need you. We'll stitch it on there. Give us $1 million. We'll take it. So there's been some scuttlebutt about, all right, if you're going to be trading guys at the deadline, are you going to trade Ian Happ? So where would you stand on the should they or should they not trade Ian Happ at the trade deadline?
Ian Happ is like probably the most polarizing Cub on the roster for me right now, because after the 2020 offseason going into 21, that feels to me like the most botched offseason they've had ever, because they traded Yu Darvish, but that was like the one opportunity you would have had to have traded Jason Heyward, to have traded Ian Happ, because they both came off really good seasons. And, last year with Happ, it felt like he was just non-existent until everyone was traded and everything was, meaningless at that point. Now he's looking pretty good, and, this team is going nowhere. And he's like the guy, he's like the one guy I wish they could give a 1-year deal to,
Yeah.
because like it's such a mixed bag with him. Like there was in 2018 or 2019, I remember reading on Fangraphs that he had like the biggest swing and miss on pitches in the strike zone, and like it's just, I don't know, man. He needed like so much work, and like he missed a lot of 2019. I remember too. He was down in Iowa, and like they needed a leadoff hitter that entire year. And who knows, like if he had been the hitter that he was in the second half of 2021 back then, you know, who knows who's still here? Possibly Joe Madden's still here. Possibly,
Wow,
you know,
they Joe got like because A, they didn't want to pay him anymore, and B, they Jed and Theo wanted to run the team. They wanted to run the team during games. They wanted to just get a manager who would say, they would hand this little, here's our game plan, go get it. Joe was like, hey, this is great. Look at that. What font is that? Is that Helvetica? I like Helvetica. Let me give you 15 minutes on the history of the font and how it was invented in Pennsylvania. And then, all right, fuck that. I'm going to do whatever I want anyway. It's funny because Joe has somehow gone from, in the eyes of people in baseball, from when he was with the Rays, you know, the hipster with the big glasses who was constantly like, you know, listening to the stat geeks and doing that too. By the time he left the Cubs, and especially with the Angels, this guy who was Mr. Seat of the Pants, I'm not going to look at any numbers anymore. And I don't think the truth was ever on either end of that. I think he was always a guy who was open to the numbers, but he'd also been in baseball forever. And he's like, look, I think I can figure some of this shit out on my own. I don't really need to look at your spreadsheet between every pitch. I think that was a big part of it. The problem I have with Hap is, for a guy who has all these tools, you know, he's a switch hitter, he's got decent speed. Apparently he's grading out very well in left field. I still, every time there's a ball hit that he has to move more than 3 steps, I just assume he's not going to catch it. He's not really good at anything. He's just pretty good at a lot of stuff, which has some value. But I gave up on him the first half of last season when, you know, they were still trying to win something. He wasn't just bad; he was useless. He was hitting like 170 at the trade deadline, and there was a lot of talk they were just going to DFA him. And then he went on you were talking about signing to a 1-year contract. Is it allowable to pay a guy month to month? All right, Ian, we're going to decide whether to renew you for next month on the 29th of every month. So just let us know if we'll let you know if you're going to stay or if you're going to go. Yeah, and I guess I look at him now as like he's the avatar of the failures of the post World Series team, and I'm like, just make him go away. Just put him somewhere else. I don't want to. I'm tired of watching Jason Heyward. I'm tired of watching Ian Happ, and I'm sure you could trade Happ for something, which you.
Oh yeah, you would get a decent haul for him because, I mean, like you said, versatile player. It's a first-round pick. You know, plays multiple positions, has some power, switch hitter. Like, you know, there is value there, and you kind of just hope that some team buys into that. And
well, yeah, you need one team to think that he's as good as like the director Morale thinks he is, and then you'd be in great shape. But I think most teams look at him like, oh yeah, that's a pretty useful extra guy. I love the guys who are like, look at his WAR. He should be starting in an All-Star game. It's like, look, I get what it says. I've seen him play. He should not be. He can go to the All-Star game. They can give him maybe they can give him 10% off a ticket, and he could go, and that would be fine. But I don't.
Think of it like,
I don't want to see him running around in the outfield on my All-Star game.
Think of it like this: if he were experienced enough in the minors to have been called up in 2016, and also you had a healthy Kyle Schwarber for the full year, like, he probably would not have been a full-time starter. He would have still been like a 4th or 5th outfielder at that point.
Yeah, I mean he wasn't ready, so we got a second go around of Chris Coughlin. Maybe that's why I don't like Ian Happ. I don't know. The other guy that I don't like, and I get some grief for this. I don't like Frank Schwindel. And it's nothing. It's not. I'm nothing against Frank as a rubber-faced human. I really don't like. This is not fair to me to Frank. I will acknowledge this right away. I'm not being fair to Frank, but he is. He's everything that's wrong with their supposed rebuild.
Exactly. He's
And
just
that
window
was
glass.
everybody knew. Everybody knew. And if you didn't, you're a moron. He shouldn't be in baseball. That the numbers he put up the last 2 months of last season were they were basically imaginary. I mean, I know they exist, but that you were not going to get anything close to that out of him. And if you were a serious baseball team, you would have said first base is a place we need to upgrade. And the Cubs are like, nope, that's good enough. We'll just run Frank back there again with nobody, no second, no backup plan. And I get the feeling that we're going to know that I wrote about this like when the Cubs signed John Lester in the offseason before 2015. That was the sign. I mean, they had just hired Joe Madden a few months before, 2 months before, and they signed John Lester, and that was Theo signed us. The rebuild was over. It's time to start winning. I feel like with this Cub team, it will be when they finally get rid of Frank Schwindel. All right, Frank, you got to go. We're good. We're playing real guys now.
Yeah, the charade is over. Like, now that you bring this up, like, did you feel this way a little bit about one of your fan favorites in Luis Valbuena when he got moved?
No, because Luis was a superstar.
Sky Point Louie, you were gone too soon.
I still don't think that was the right move. Yeah, sure, Dexter turned out okay, and the kid that they called up to play third base turned out all right. But I don't know that Valbuena couldn't have outplayed both Dexter and Chris Bryant. Nobody knows that. Nobody could prove to me he would have been better than them in 2015 and 2016. And think about this: if he's on that team, he probably doesn't have to play winter ball. He's still alive. The Cubs killed Luis Valbuena. I'm never going to forgive him for that.
See, this is how we frame the Ricketts. This is how we get them. This is how we get a new.
Remember when they killed the guy? How did they kill him? Okay, let me tell you how they killed him. They traded him to a team. He played for that team for a little while. Then he left that team. He went to another team. He played for that team for a couple of years. And then in winter ball one year, some thugs who put rocks in the road to slow down cars and then rob them did that to him, and they killed him. And it's all Tom Ricketts' fault. I think that'll hold up in court if I try to get it prosecuted. Yeah, well, I'm not comfortable with comparing Frank Schwindel to Luis Valbuena. I might compare Patrick Wisdom to Luis Valbuena. This is also me not being fair to Frank. It's the same thing with P Wiz, but I like him.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm ready if they got rid of him tomorrow, I wouldn't shed a tear. But I'd be like, all right, now that's the kind of guy you want on a bad team. You want the guy who hits 500-foot home runs and swings from his ass and plays good defense, and it looks like he actually has some actual baseball skill. If I watch Frank, it's not just that he can't catch, and he can't, which is ironic because he was a catcher. But I mean, there are 16-inch softball first basemen who have better footwork around the bag than Frank. And I forget what highlight was. It was a Nico play. It was a really nice play. And they showed it over and over and over again. And you could see Frank start his stretch for the throw way too early and then barely be able to adjust to where the ball was because he's already on his front foot with his gloves straight up in the air. It's like, Frank, I mean, come on. What do you do in spring training? Do they ever throw you the ball?
Exactly. This is the type of stuff you should be prepared for. And like, honestly, we don't have to go down the road of like, who they should have kept from the World Series core and everything, but that's a pretty huge thing they miss from not having Anthony Rizzo is that just he would catch everything at first base. And, he was tall, a throw that would go over most first basemen's head, he would catch.
Yeah,
we saw it in the World Series.
It's jarring because we just got so used to it, except for when his back would flare up. You didn't worry about anything around the bag and on bunts. I mean, he would play. I was watching the Yankees the other night, and the Yankee announcers are like, "He's standing 20 feet from home plate." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what he does. He's been on your team for almost a year now. You've never seen this before." Yeah, I mean, they miss all that stuff. We can talk about it. The whole idea that they should have kept. I mean, I thought it was ridiculous that they couldn't get any of those guys signed. And the one I would have kept, I would have preferred to have kept Chris Bryant. Of course, he spent the whole time on the injured list this year, and that would have looked great. But
right.
Who knows? Maybe it was it could have been a high altitude back injury. Might not have happened had the Cubs played him at sea level instead. There was this ridiculous clip I saw today of two of my favorite people, Chris Mad Dog Russo and Jesse Rogers, discussing the rebuild. And Russo is making the outsider point. He's like, look, I know Cub fans are mad, but 2015, they win the wild card, win 97 games of the wild card. They beat the Cardinals in the playoffs. They lose to the Mets in the NLCS. 2016, they win the World Series. 2017, they win the division again. They go back to the playoffs. They beat the Nationals. They lose to the Dodgers. 2018, although he got it wrong. He thought they lost the wild card game to the Brewers. As we know, they lost game 163 to the Brewers, and then the next day they lost the wild card game to the fucking Rockies.
Yes.
He's like, 2019, he blamed it all on Craig Kimbrell, which seemed a little, some of it was deserved, but not all of it. And then 2020, go back to the playoffs and lose to the Marlins. He's like, that's 5 out of 6 years to the playoffs, and 6 years where they were pretty good. And why are Cub fans so mad? And Jesse's like, I don't know. I don't like it when people let him off the hook with the idea that, look, if they'd have kept those guys, none of those guys are playing very well. I mean, Rizzo has the best stats, but most of his slugging comes in Yankee Stadium, and none of those balls would be home runs at Wrigley. It's like, that's all well and good. You can give Jed credit if he somehow foresaw that none of these guys were going to be worth a damn. What you don't forgive him for is that they just took all that money and they just put it in their pocket.
Yes,
like, they
exactly.
didn't have to give us... You can let Chris Bryant and Javier Baez and Anthony Rizzo go. But then don't act like giving us, in there to fill their spots. Patrick
Jonathan VR.
Yeah, Frank Schwindel and Nick Madrigal, basically, because they just moved Nico from second to short. It's like it was not one or the other, and that's where that's really why Cub fans are mad. And then you get you get some of the media people going, well, you want them to keep all those guys, and those guys all suck. It's like, no, I want them to have good players. And they clearly don't have very many on this team.
No, they didn't. And this was coming into an offseason, too, where there was a lot of talent to be had out there. Talent that was pretty comparable to what you just let go at the deadline. And all you came away with was Marcus Stroman, Seiya Suzuki, and a couple fill-in pieces. I guess... Yeah, David Robertson has been a really good closer, too.
Yeah, but I mean, they paid him. I mean, he was this time last year, he was pitching in the Olympics. Nobody wanted him. The Rays signed him.
That's right. He had just come off of Tommy John.
Yeah, the Rays signed him for like the last month of the season, and he pitched in the playoffs for him. But he had no market. I mean, everybody's kind of looking at him like, oh, well, let the team like the Cubs sign him. We'll see if his arm's any good. And if it is, we'll trade for him. So that was that. I mean, that's why they signed Michael Givens and Daniel Norris. This was all with an idea that they don't want all rookies in the bullpen, and then they would hopefully one or two of them would actually be good, and then they could get something for him. You don't get much for a middle reliever, but you might get something. But the thing I'll never understand, it really started the year after the World Series, with the offseason before 2018, where the market for free agents really dried up. And you had a glut of useful free agents that couldn't command the money that they thought they were going to get. Mm-hmm. And it was a perfect opportunity for a team to build really good depth on relatively the cheap. Because guys who in the past would have been starters on, mediocre teams, you could get to be your first guy off the bench or to fill in one hole you might have. And the Cubs, for the most part, sat it out. We got Daniel Descalso.
Right. It feels
That's
weird
all
that
we got,
they
and they're still doing
it. It's weird that they took that position, considering that in 2015 they created a freaking amazing bullpen out of a bunch of failed starters and Travis Wood and Clayton Richard and Trevor Cahill. And it's like, why wouldn't you think to maybe try to do that with your offense and, get some undervalued guys that were starters on other teams that could maybe be useful for you off the bench?
So you bring up a good point. I think what their theory was. So they felt it was fine to sign those guys in 15 because they had only gotten here in the offseason between 11 and 12. And all of their draft picks, none of those guys were ready yet. But, oh, man, wait till our wave of pitching shows up. This is going to be great. And so I think they go into those seasons after that like, no, we're not going to lock up bullpen spots on these guys. We're gonna be able to have our own homegrown minimum salary guys in that bullpen. And then none of them were any good. And then they couldn't do it. And then they ended up having to make trades, like I think he says George, not Jorge, but Paredes. He hit three homers yesterday and he hit a homer today. He's a guy the Cubs had to trade to get Justin Willson because they were in such dire straits, and they thought the Justin Wilson thing was a coup. They're like, oh, this guy's really good, and we're going to have him for this year, and then he's going to become our closer next year. This is going to be great. And he was bad from the minute they got him. And they had to make too many moves like that for guys because they couldn't backfill with their own pitchers. They couldn't do it. Their whole theory on how they built the team was we're gonna spend on pitching, and then we're going to bring up all our young draft picks are going to get in the lineup, and then as the draft picks start to get into arbitration time, we're going to be able to extend them because we're not going to be paying for pitching because now we're going to have young pitchers and veteran players, and and then none of those pitchers ever showed up, and so like they traded for Cole Hamels, and then they had to pick up Cole Hamels' option because they didn't have enough pitching for the next year.
Yeah,
and they just
had to cut Drew Smiley because to afford him for the next year.
Like that was the day. Then. That was the day if there was any thought that the Cubs were going to turn into a dynasty, that was the day it ended. The day they're like, okay, Drew Smiley has a $7 million option, and if we're going to keep Cole Hamels, we can't afford to keep Drew Smiley. It's like, no, of course you can afford it. You don't want to afford it. You've chosen not to spend it. It's not that you can't. You won't. There's a big difference. And the team that won games because even the 16 team was incredibly deep, and then they got less deep, and you ran into injuries, and you didn't have guys that could, you weren't bringing quality players in to back up these guys. I mean, all of a sudden you look up and Mike Freeman's playing shortstop for you in a pennant race.
After you had all these shortstops in your organization,
well, you do all these shortstops.
Complaining about too many shortstops, and then you wind up with Mike Freeman because Javier Baez is hurt and Addison Russell can't stay out of trouble, and
it's like the Prospect Perverts who they look at these lists of guys and they think they're all going to be good. And they're like, oh my God, what are the Cubs going to do when Pete Crow-Armstrong shows up and Christian Hernandez shows up and when just ticking names off. Kevin Alcantara and blah 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 blah. It's like, look, maybe they're all 14. Maybe that's the thing I don't get. They haven't been around and they don't understand. It's like, look, it's good to have a big number of prospects in your system because most of them won't turn into anything. And one of the problems the Cubs have had forever is they'd have like 3 prospects, and the odds of the 3 prospects turning into something are very bad. Now, if you have 10, you have a much better chance that a couple of those guys are actually going to be good. But this whole idea that you're just going to look at all these guys that they've drafted and traded for, and holy shit. I mean, look at Myrtle Beach. They scored 9 runs a game. It's like, all right, that's, those guys are 4 levels from the big leagues. There's a big difference. There's a huge weeding out process that'll happen between now and then. And you're going to have more things to worry about than what I think might be, maybe the second thing they're really going to have to figure out is if Pete Crow-Armstrong is going to play in the big leagues, he's going to have to figure out what the hell to do with his name on the back of the jersey, because we can't have this circle of Crow-Armstrong. I don't know if you've seen, I don't know which, he's at South Bend now, I guess. They have it like stacked.
Ooh, I kind of like that.
That does not look good. It does not. It doesn't look good.
Maybe I haven't
I mean, the
seen that
solution,
yet,
right, is to, I've got a couple suggestions for the Cubs. Okay, one, have you seen the jersey where the Seiya Suzuki jersey they sell where Suzuki is written in Japanese characters?
Yes.
He should wear that in games. That should be the Cubs should just
Oh,
start that.
absolutely.
That should be his jersey. He should wear Suzuki written in, whatever that is, whatever language, Japanese, I guess. The other one is for Pete Crow-Armstrong, just put PCA on the back. Let him go with his initials. Let him be the new trendsetter because his name's too fucking long. He's not big enough. Maybe if he was Dan Vogelbach, then absolutely he could have his first and middle name on it with room to spare. But he's not.
The shoulders stretch out the letters a little bit more.
Either that, or you're going to have to get him on the roids so that he gets big enough that he can fit his name on his back of his jersey. So that's the kind of thing the Cubs need to be worried about right now. Is how when Pete Crow-Armstrong comes up to be a 14-time All-Star. How are we gonna fit his name on the back of the jersey?
Mm-hmm.
I remember they had a thing with Mark DeRosa where I think it was like on the pinstripes for 1 year. It hit the D and DE and DeRosa they were both caps, but on the Blues the E was little.
Really?
And it wasn't consistent. And then they finally, I think they gave him the little. Del Rosa, D-E-R-O-S-A, yeah. The E was, and then they went to the little E. But I remember for a while, it's like, it doesn't his uniforms don't match. Not to be confused with the time Junior Lake wore the wrong.
Yes,
jersey.
I remember that early in 2014
when they had those awful, the Cubs in block letter grays that they had that looked like they went down to Sport Mart and had
the Wrigley 100th anniversary thing, yeah.
And they just had them made for a softball team. Yeah, those looks good. Let's wear that. And I think he was wearing the regular road gray, and everybody else had the other ones on. And I'm I'm a junior. I wouldn't wear the other ones either.
I want to say I was at a game in 2018 up in Milwaukee at Miller Park. Well, American Family Field now, but whatever. So it's always going to be Miller Park. And I want to say it might have been future Cub Jeremy Jeffress. I think he was wearing they were wearing the navy blue tops.
Oh yeah.
And it was the rest of the team said Brewers on it, but his said Milwaukee.
Yeah. Yeah, former Cub Jason Adam took a bunch of crap, deservedly, when he wouldn't wear the pride. He wouldn't wear the pride patch on his jersey, and it got me to thinking though. If I were playing for the Cubs, I wouldn't wear those fucking City Connects. I hate them. I don't like the blue pants and the blue. I think it just looks dumb. Looks like a softball team. So I would come out in the pinstripes when everybody else was wearing the Wrigleyville all blues, and just be like, "Nope, this is my uniform. This is what I'm wearing today. I don't care." It reminds me of the last year. Last year, I guess, when they mic'd up. Maybe it was the pandemic year before. It was right. It was the pandemic year before the pandemic when ESPN mic'd up Bryant and Rizzo for the spring training game.
Yes.
And the ESPN guys asked, they noticed that Bryant was wearing his regular Cub hat, even though all the other guys had their spring training hats on. And they're like, "Hey, did you wear the wrong hat?" He's like, "No, I hate those things. I won't wear them." Because they were stupid.
More power to you for that, KV.
I don't know if you've seen the 4th of July hats that all the teams are going to wear.
Oh, yeah.
They are terrible. I guarantee you if I was a big league player, I would not wear that. I would just wear my regular hat and be like, find me. I don't care. I'm not going to look like... It's like a starter jacket turned into a hat. No.
Right.
I'm not wearing that.
Do they really have to design everything to look like graffiti now? Would it not just be, can't just make it the basic same design with just red, white, and blue?
The thing is, it's clearly there's assholes who buy that stuff. And they're like, "Oh, this will sell. Some dummy's going to buy it."
Yeah. And then a year later, it winds up being a hat you wear maybe when you mow the lawn or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's raining shit outside. Oh, I have just the hat. Thank God for the Cubs and the 4th of July. Woo, it's going to look great.
Yep.
Well, trying to think. We didn't really talk. I think we've pretty much. Is there anything we didn't talk about? Yeah, I can't really. I mean, I could go on a rant about Marquee, but it's kind of lost on you. Now, this is ironic, right?
for sure.
Because Dave Brown only gets he lives in Kansas City. He doesn't get Marquee. But he can watch Marquee on like MLB.TV. He can watch the game coverage.
Hmm.
Donahue also does not get Marquee, so he can't watch. So it's pretty much just Pusateri is the only one I can bitch about Marquee. Or I have to have John Greenberg on so we can make fun of Marquee. I can't make fun of Marquee because you don't get to see it. But just take my word for it. I think I'm actually. Well, I'll tell you this. I can tell you this happened. The year that Marquee launched, which was the pandemic,
Right.
they were slow to roll out. Like I had DirecTV at the time, and they were ready on day one on DirecTV, so I got to watch from them. But Comcast had not picked them up yet. Comcast did it like right before the opener, and I had been making fun of Marquee, and all of a sudden, a bunch of readers got to see it, and I got a bunch of emails and messages that were like, "Look, I thought you were just doing a bit about just how terrible they are. But I actually think you were being too nice to them."
It didn't help that like when they launched, it was in the middle of like everyone having to record it from Zoom and everything.
Yeah,
I mean, I did have cable at the time that it launched, so I did get to see a decent amount of their programming. It's not. And the sad part is, I was really excited for it when it happened too, because I know everyone makes fun of Ricketts from the convention with him saying, "Why are you booing the Marquee Network?" I kind of found myself a little too young to be caught up in like the WGN nostalgia. Like my first real year of following the Cubs was like 2005, and that felt like the first year where it really started to be like a split between Comcast Sportsnet and WGN at the time.
yeah.
And like I kind of preferred like the sports network style of Comcast. But I mean, I know there's a lot more, there's a lot more Cub fans that lean toward WGN too. And we were hoping that it would be something that would, look a little more like that.
There's no reason it should be this bad. It shouldn't be bad at all, even when the team's bad. I mean, the most alarming thing about them when the pandemic hit was just how little content they had prepared for their launch.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said it before. It's like it was a surprise to them. Like one day they were like, "Do you know we start on Friday? This Friday? Oh shit! We should have filmed some stuff." Because I just assumed they were going to have they've talked about what's going to be a great place for documentaries, and we're going to play old games, and we're going to come up with we'll have interview shows, we'll have all kinds of stuff. And I get it then that when the pandemic hit, it screwed up. Like they were doing their little Cubs 360 show, and everybody had to be on Zoom, and there weren't any, and there weren't any games, and that's like 8 hours of their day because they show the game and then they replay it with the pre and post on either end of it. That's more like 10 hours probably. And that programming was gone. They didn't have anything for a while, and that's completely understandable, but it's not understandable that they didn't have anything else. And then they were so bad at picking, like Crane, of course Crane's full of shit, so that's probably the reason. Crane was like, we have access to the entire old WGN library of games. And we've got almost all the games from Comcast Sportsnet and Fox Sports Chicago. I mean, if you could think of a Cub game, we've got access to it. And so here during the pandemic, they're playing old games, and they're playing like the same 5 over and over and over again. And they're nonsensical. Like, the one game they love to show, they still show it, is Harry's last home game.
Right. Yes.
It's
the
terrible.
One game where
Harry's, it's a bad game. The Cubs were terrible. And it's not prime here. It's like, how about the opposite? Why don't you show Harry's first game? That would be cool.
Yes.
Why don't we see that? Or why don't you just find cool games from like 84 and 89 and play those in their entirety? Because the only time we ever saw them was we saw the WJN used to play in 89. The Cubs had this ridiculous comeback against the Astros where they were down, I think, 9-1, and they came back and won 10-9. Dwight Smith had the game-winning hit, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember who had the game-winning hit because when there was a rain delay, Harry and Steve would yuck it up for a while, and then they'd throw it to that game. And then the rain delay would never last long enough to get to the end of it. Sometimes the Cubs were so bad, you're like, could you just keep playing this? Do we have to watch the current Cubs? Can we just finish watching the rain delay game? But it's like, I know there are cool games that you can show again. Show those, and they were. One thing that's very clear is that they were so hell bent on making this a national feel to their broadcast, which Cub fans don't want.
No, like it's always been a local feel. Yeah,
it's stupid. Even down to the stupid thing, like we're gonna have Len and JD wear ties. Why? Who gives a shit about that? But it's very clear that they don't have people in key positions who appreciate the history, bad or good, or embrace it, of the Cubs. So there's a lot of stuff they don't even know. Like, they don't even think about it. And they're like old games and stuff that would be cool to kick up. Honestly, we should send them. I'll create a little box set of Remember This Crap, and they can just plow their way through it. Give it to an intern and tell the intern you're gonna be the guy now who helps us pick, games and segments and stuff. Because it's very clear they don't know what happened. They brought a bunch of outsiders in, and there's nobody there with like an institutional knowledge of the Cubs to help them do things that appeal to actual Cub fans. They seem to think that they can do this weird generic MLB Network broadcast all the time, and that we're going to lap it up because that's what we want. It's like, no, that's not what we want. And they don't even. I'm not going to get on this tangent again about why I hate Ryan Dempster. A big part of it is that Marquee encourages him to do his hack impression of Harry. Mm-hmm. There was a reason Cub fans really liked Harry. I mean, and some of it was Harry's drunk again and the Budweiser commercials and all that stuff. But what we liked about Harry was Harry would never bullshit us. When things were bad, you knew it. Because Harry was, and I will give him this, he was kinder to the Cubs than he had been to the Cardinals and the A's and the White Sox. He was a little more mellow, and I think he felt like he had to tone it down a little bit for WGN, but he didn't tone it down that much. A good example of that is GN AM on some anniversary of the Sandberg game replayed the radio broadcast, and
which Harry was a part of because it was a national game,
because it was an NBC game. So instead of just getting Harry for the middle three, Harry was there for. I'm sure he did at least the first three and the last three. He may very well have stayed through the middle too, just because he had nothing else to do. The Cubs get down in that game, and Harry's pissed, like. He hated the Cardinals because they had fired him, and here was a big game. The Cubs looked like they might be good, and they were finally going to be able to compete with the Cardinals. And he wanted them to beat them every time, and things are going bad, and Harry's mad. And then when they have the big comeback, and then obviously the two Sandberg comes, he loses his mind. Because it's exciting, but also Harry's like, fuck you to the Cardinals. And it's like, I don't know how you communicate to Marquee. It's like, that's what we want.
Exactly.
We want the feeling that the people that are like presenting this game to us are as invested in it as we are. They're not like these, kind of, 30,000 feet observers, classing up the broadcast. Like, we don't really need that. But I get real nitpicky. Like, one of the things that bothers me is their stupid score bug. They're the only team, because I watch lots of games, when they put the mile per hour for the pitch up, they replace the count with it. Every other team replaces the pitch total for the pitcher. Because I don't know how many times you look up after a pitch and you just want to know what the count is, and you have to wait for the stupid number to roll back around again. And they're like, oh, I'm sure that's a little thing. Yeah, it's a little thing you get wrong. And you get enough little things wrong, and they all turn into one big thing. And it just pisses people like me off. But
right, and it's more important to the game to really know like what the count is at all times. And, maybe later in the game you want to know the pitch count, but like you really need to know the pitch count, like, first couple innings when it goes away after the miles per hour. I mean,
yeah, and they didn't for a long time. They didn't have the pitcher up there. They didn't have the batter up there. It's like the other thing is they have a weird. I'm getting real nitpicky now. But what the hell? It's towards the end of the podcast, people hanging in. They must really want to listen to me bitch. I don't understand why. And they're not the only ones. Nobody who's covered the Cubs since they've gone to kind of the scorebug era. Shouldn't the Cubs scorebug kind of replicate the Wrigley scoreboard? Like,
Yes.
shouldn't
That
it
would
have a
look
green
amazing.
background? Shouldn't the numbers look like the tiles that you put up? Couldn't you actually do the graphic where when the score changed, like it looked like they were actually changing the tile on the scoreboard?
So it's funny you bring that up. I remember this might be something that Huey might bring up when you guys hit 2010 on the wheel. I remember the first year of Ricketts, before they had the video boards up there, but when it was still the like electronic message board underneath center field. I remember like when batters would come up, it would come up in that kind of style, and like thinking, a couple years later that like, they're going to have their own TV network and they're going to have video boards in the park. That would be a nice little feature that they could have in there. And it's funny you bring that up.
Yeah. I mean, because I give these things way too much thought. Like if I was designing their scorebug, it would be roughly the shape of the center field scoreboard. Obviously, we wouldn't have all this unless people want to get magnifying glasses out. We wouldn't have any of the other scores on it, but it would have the clock, like centered and kind of sitting up on top, and the clock would actually work. Like you could actually look at it and you could see what time it is.
Yeah,
even though nobody needs that, it would just be a cool little extra feature. And then like you could even have the bottom when it kind of pops up, like when you if you want to like update hits and stuff, then they can be yellow, just like they are on the real scoreboard.
Yes.
It's like instead what they did. I mean, if you watch a Mets game, the Cubs have the Mets scorebug. It's the exact same thing, except the Mets actually do theirs right. The mile per hour replaces the pitch count. It doesn't replace the batter count, just the pitch total. And it's like, well, I mean, they cut it. They half-ass so much of this. I mean, there's so much cool stuff they could have done, and you could think of all this cool stuff, and then like watch what they do, and it's like, oh, they don't do any of it. What do they do that's so like cool? They don't. Everything they do is a punchline. Like tonight, they couldn't find any parents to interview, so we literally got an entire half inning with Ian Happ's high school baseball coach. Who gives a shit?
Right. Seriously, we get it. Ian Happ is from Pittsburgh. We know this already.
It's like, look, I know you have they play a few national games. You got like 150 some games to do. I get it. You've got a lot of dead time. But they lean on the same shit over and over and over again. I mean, you dread it. If they, if a player makes his debut, if they can find a relative, they're going to hassle him. I do think that when, so they finally ran into the Schwindells when they went to Yankee Stadium.
That's right, because he's from Jersey.
Yeah. And so Frank Schwindell's dad's name is Frank. They interviewed him. Frank's father-in-law is also named Frank. They interviewed him. And he was drunk and screaming, and that was actually entertaining. But Taylor wasn't there. It was Elise. And I could just imagine Taylor somewhere so jealous that Elise got to interview the father-in-law. And she has never done that, so she'll have to find one. But she got to make up for it with a freaking baseball coach. The other thing, and I make fun of this all the time, but he does it a lot. Like Boog will, and I like Boog fine. But he'll be talking about like a player, and he'll like look through his stats, and he'll be like, "Oh my God, this guy, he hit 387 in college." He's like shocked that they were. It's like Boog,
everyone hits 387.
Is it really surprising you that a Major League Baseball player was good in college? And like they were going over what incredible stats Ian Happ had in high school. It's like, yeah, he's a Major League Baseball player. They pretty much all have ridiculous higy school stats.
In fact, make it to the major leagues.
In fact,
the major league.
His high school coach was like, I had coached his brother. His brother was really good, and I coached him, and he put up the best numbers any high schooler is ever going to put up. And then he talks about something else for a little bit, and he goes, well, then he went to Cincinnati because none of the big schools were recruiting. It's like, all right, what was the thing about he put up the biggest numbers any high schooler's ever going to? All right. Well, I've worn myself out complaining about these things. So, yeah, I think this is a good catch-up for people who wanted to hear people bitch on this podcast about the Cubs. So I appreciate you helping me out.
Of course. Happy to do it anytime with you.
Yes. I mean, I think going forward, they're going to need to be complained about more often. So I'm sure we will do this again. So thanks a lot, Mike. Oh, I didn't let you do any plugs at the beginning. I don't know if you had anything to plug. How can people follow you on the Twitter?
Twitter is Prazmaster, first four letters of my last name, Master. I've had that nickname since high school. Same with Instagram, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, follow me on Twitter for some terrible jokes and some inane Cubs memes, and
That's what Twitter's for.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, of course, Andy. Thank you very much for having me on.
Many of us have herpes.